All right, let's get started. So welcome, everyone. I'm Coach Sophie, and today you're joining me for this presentation on fueling for metabolic efficiency and fat loss. So I'm Coach Sophie Marin. I am a certified sports nutritionist. I'm also a UCI Diploma cycling coach, a successful Cat 1 road racer, and I specialize in pairing nutrition and training to maximize performance. I also specialize in women's nutrition and pairing the menstrual cycle with training, as well as body composition changes. So here are some of the goals of today that I'd love us to focus on. Number one, I want to help you understand the body's primary energy systems and how that relates to training and nutrition. I want to introduce you to the periodized nutrition concept. I want to demonstrate how to adjust your nutrition to maximize training adaptations. And finally, I want to teach you how to improve metabolic efficiency and increase fat burning via the Train Low protocol, which I will be diving into later. So getting started. Identify the demands and goals of your training. So this is important to start off any workout and also training phase, really understanding what are you trying to get out of this. Training without a focus can only take you so far. So there's two types of training sessions. There's a performance promoting session where your goal is to just hit peak performance or as high power as possible or fastest speed as possible. But there's also adaptation focused sessions where the goal is to maybe not hit max performance, but to achieve particular adaptations, let's say aerobically, anaerobically. And I'll dive into that more later. So before any workout or ride, I want you to ask yourself, what is the goal of this ride or training phase? Is it performance? Is it fat burning and endurance or metabolic efficiency? Is it high intensity execution? Or is it simply, I just want to have fun and feel good throughout? Each of these purposes will determine a different nutrition strategy. Today, I want to focus on fat burning, endurance, and metabolic efficiency. So specifically to cycling, but this also applies to most endurance sports, I want you to consider the demands of the workout you're about to embark on. What is the route? Is it rolling? Is it flat? Is it mountainous? What's the duration? Is it going to be short or very long? What about intensity? Is it hard? Is it going to be moderate? Is it going to be easy? And also in particular, a thing we forget about is what are the days prior? What do those look like? Are you coming off of rest or are you coming off of a multi-day training block and fatigued and perhaps even glycogen depleted? When it comes to the route, the harder the course, the more likely you'll you'll need to rely on carbohydrate to fuel the effort. Intensity, of course, the higher the intensity, again, the higher the reliance on carbohydrate. And the easier the ride, the more your body will actually depend on stored fats to fuel the effort. And of course, if you're fatigued, it's possible your metabolism will still be elevated and also require more intake of nutrition, of food. So let's get into a little bit of the science behind how our bodies use energy. And by understanding this, you'll also learn how to fuel accordingly. So there's two primary ways our bodies produce energy. There's aerobic metabolism, which is fat burning, And there's anaerobic or glycolytic metabolism, which depends on glycogen or its carbohydrate burning. And I won't get into the PCR creatine phosphate system today, but we're going to focus on aerobic and glycolytic. So for an aerobic or low intensity ride, you are doing longer, low intensity efforts. You can typically sustain this for hours, especially if you're well trained. A good cue, if you don't rely on heart rate or power, is you can typically speak 4 words in a row without taking a breath. Right? So you can see the picture here. These women look very relaxed. They're at a casual talking pace. That's a good example of an aerobic low intensity ride. And now the aerobic workouts will rely primarily on stored fatty acids or fat for fuel. And it requires oxygen. So an example might be 2 hours at zone 2 endurance pace. Now, on the other hand, an anaerobic or glycolytic metabolism, these are typically anywhere from 10 to 90-second or even 2-minute high-intensity efforts over threshold or 85% or greater max heart rate. Usually, you can only speak maybe 2 words at a time or fewer before needing to take a breath. So that's like, my name is Coach Sophie. That's how hard you're going. And so with anaerobic metabolism or glycolytic metabolism, you're relying primarily on stored carbohydrates or glycogen for fuel and does not require oxygen for energy conversion. So this picture, right, this is a race scenario now that we're seeing. And an example might be a short, hard, high-intensity efforts like interval training, hill repeats, a bike race, any kind of race, really. So let's talk about how nutrition demands shift according to training intensity. So now that we've talked about aerobic and anaerobic metabolism, the 2 types of ways we produce energy, there are now 2 primary fuel sources for exercise. There's fat and glycogen. When we are completely glycogen depleted, yes, we have some reliance on up to 10% reliance on amino acids or the breakdown of protein, but we're not going to talk about that. We're going to talk about the 2 major fuel sources. And glycogen is just simply stored glucose, which is what carbohydrate breaks down into. And it's the stored glucose stored in our liver and our muscles. So fat fuels aerobic exercise. Glycogen fuels anaerobic or high intensity exercise. Usually we're utilizing a combination of both. So something that I find fascinating always is that fat is essentially infinite as a fuel source. It accounts for anywhere from 30,000 to 100,000 calories of energy stored in the body, even for a very lean athlete. And you can sustain low intensity exercise for hours or even days. It does not need to be replenished exogenously during the exercise itself, meaning we don't need to take in fat to fuel the fat burning activity because it's coming from our bodies directly. Now, glycogen, on the other hand, is finite. And glycogen really is one of the biggest limiting factors when it comes to endurance exercise. We have about anywhere from 1,400 to 2,000 calories, or anywhere from 350 to 500 grams of stored glycogen in the body at any given time. Now, that's in a fully recovered state. If you're coming off of several days of training, that glycogen is going to be depleted. And glycogen must be replenished, typically during the actual training session itself. The time to depletion for this glycogen is, if we're doing moderate or lower intensity exercise, anywhere from 90 to 120 minutes. And then if we're doing really high intensity exercise, we can deplete glycogen in as little as 20 minutes. So now imagine you're doing a very hard event that is 1 hour. You very well could deplete glycogen stores, especially if you haven't done an optimal job of fueling ahead of time. So just a review here, fat versus glycogen utilization. Fat is basically infinite and glycogen is finite. So this is going to lead us very nicely into why metabolic efficiency matters, because wouldn't you rather have your body be very good at utilizing this infinite fuel source, essentially of fat, rather than quickly depleting the finite performance limiter of glycogen? So, in summary for this section, the harder you go, the more reliance on glycogen and carbohydrate your body has. During high-intensity rides, we can typically only replenish about 15 to 35% of the calories we burn. This is why it's important to be metabolically efficient. And by that, I mean a high-fat burner that's very good at sparing glycogen until the final moments when we need it most. And it's also important and why we need to continue refueling in the 24 to 48 hours post-workout. On the other hand, when it comes to easier aerobic exercise, this requires lower carbohydrate consumption and can actually promote fat loss by increasing fat burning. And that's what we call metabolic efficiency. That said, caveat here, you will still burn some glycogen during aerobic exercise, so you still have to replenish some carbohydrate. I don't want you doing a 2-hour run or a 4-hour cycling workout in zone 2 and eating nothing, because that's not actually optimal. We are still typically using both these energy systems in conjunction at all times, just at varying percentages. So, what is periodized nutrition? This is something I'm passionate about teaching athletes. Just as we periodize and shift our training throughout the year, so too should we shift our nutritional approach throughout the year. So, nutrition periodization is when we shift and adapt nutritional strategies in response to certain periods of the training program to enhance the adaptations targeted by each exercise session or to enhance performance long term. So you'll see in this image here, this is an annual training plan I've created, and the blue bars are volume and the little red X's are intensity. And you can see there's a progressive load over time, and there's a shifting of what we're working on, whether it's aerobic endurance, threshold power, VO2 max, etc. So as this training is shifting throughout the year, so too should our nutritional approach. So with periodized nutrition, early nutrition guidelines, sports nutrition guidelines, promoted a singular and somewhat static approach, focusing predominantly on carbohydrate fueling as the major energy source for muscle. And that's true. We are primarily requiring carbohydrate during training. However, contemporary guidelines for sports nutrition acknowledge differences in the requirements and goals of different sessions or phases of training, leading to a periodization of the athlete's diet. So depending on what we want our training adaptation to be, so too should we adjust our nutritional approach to maximize adaptation. So why does this matter? I really like this quote pulled from a study, one of the many studies. And this says, in sub-elite populations, better integration of train low and train high sessions, train low glycogen and train high glycogen sessions into the training sequence has been associated with superior performance compared with the same training undertaken with normal carbohydrate availability. So the conclusion of one particular study, which you see the title down below here if you want to do more research, is that short-term periodization of dietary carbohydrate availability around selected training sessions promoted significant improvements in submaximal cycling economy, as well as supramaximal cycling capacity, and 10-kilometer running time in trained endurance athletes, and fat mass decreased. So again, two types of training sessions: performance promoting and adaptation focused. Today, I'm going to focus on adaptation focused sessions. So how do we get the most out of your training sessions? I'm not talking about I want to hit peak power and I want to have peak performance. I'm talking about how do I become a great, well-rounded athlete and get the most out of training so that later I can hit that peak power and peak times. Fueling for metabolic efficiency and fat loss. So this is adaptation-focused training. So what is metabolic efficiency? Metabolic efficiency refers to the body's ability to utilize its onboard stores of carbohydrate, glycogen, and fat more efficiently during rest and across different intensities of exercise. So exercise adaptations can be optimized by training the body through both exercise and daily nutrition to utilize and oxidize higher amounts of fat, which in turn will spare glycogen, your finite carbohydrate reserves. So, metabolic efficiency. What's the deal with sparing glycogen? Well, sparing glycogen will help you last longer in those hard, long events that rely on some high intensity efforts to the end. That's typically most cycling events, most running events. You're going to have some big push at some point in these events. And we want to reserve that finite glycogen for those key moments so that we don't fade in the final. And glycogen, as I mentioned prior, is the limiting fuel for exercise. So we want as much as possible saved for when it matters most: a hard attack, the final climb, the finishing stretch. Conversely, when glycogen depletes entirely, the body has no more high-intensity fuel and instead burns fat, resulting in a surge of fatigue and a performance collapse. Of course, anyone and most endurance athletes at some point have experienced the bonk when we have completely depleted glycogen and can no longer push. And we're now crawling at a snail's pace if we're lucky. So here are some of the benefits of training metabolic efficiency. And as I said earlier, feel free to drop questions into the chat. Let us know where you're visiting from, and I'll answer those at the end. So some of the benefits of training metabolic efficiency: decreasing body fat percentage. And we do this without the mental suffering of high intensity training demands. I'll go into that later. Increasing VO2 max and aerobic capacity. Improving power to weight ratio. And of course, sparing glycogen, which allows athletes and riders to hit higher power at the end of long bouts of exercise. Now, training metabolic efficiency, also known as teaching our body how to utilize fat as its primary energy source, is beneficial because, excuse me, if the body is able to use fat to produce energy, racing athletes can become less dependent on carbohydrates. Less carbs and less need for those exogenous carbohydrates means a lower probability of GI distress. So stomach upset, cramp, etc. More fat burnt means also less body fat and a leaner frame, which does tend to have a positive impact to a point on performance for endurance athletes and any athlete where power to weight ratio does matter. So I want to just show you a couple of slides here with a software that I use. It's inside testing software. So it essentially gives us a metabolic phenotype or a metabolic profile of an athlete. And so I'm going to show you two different riders and how their metabolic profile might look differently compared to a metabolically efficient rider versus a metabolically inefficient rider. So here we see this rider has a VO2 max quite high, 73.7 milliliter per minute per kilogram. So that's a high VO2 max. Their anaerobic threshold also nice and high, 4.7 watts per kilo. This is a cyclist. And their fat max, pretty high here actually, even though it says low, that's actually pretty high. We have 7.21 calories per kilogram. Their anaerobic metabolism or their glycolytic metabolism, 0.61 millimoles. I'll go into that in a second. The key points are high VO2 max, high threshold, high fat max. And in this graph, we can actually see they're very good at clearing lactate. So they have a nice high peak here in lactate clearance. And then on the bottom chart, fat and carbohydrate combustion, we see that they're burning quite a bit of fat, this green line, up until they hit threshold where fat drops to 0, and now it's 100% carbohydrate that this person's burning. So very high little arcs here. Now let's switch gears. Here's a high glycolytic rider, a metabolically inefficient rider. So they actually similarly have a same VLA max. So they have a similar glycolytic capacity or top end. Their VO2 max is a lot lower, not low, it's still high, but for comparison's sake, it's lower than the last person's. It's about 47.6. Their threshold is a lot lower, 2.7 watts per kilo, and their fat max is now 3.6 compared to the over 7 we had earlier. So now, hard to tell because I don't have them overlaid, but this person is not clearing out lactate as much lactate as the last rider. So that means that they're going to be sitting in lactate for a longer amount of time, which then leads to acidosis or that burning feeling. And then if we look at the chart over here, they will actually have a lower fat max. And it also, you can see their carbohydrate line, they're going to be dipping into their glycogen or carbohydrate stores, even in those lower zones and those low wattages, they're already dipping into finite carbohydrate, whereas the last rider had a much lower carb consumption or utilization, I should say, leading up to threshold. So that's just a visual representation to give you an idea of how the profiles might look differently when you're metabolically efficient versus metabolically inefficient. So an inefficient rider is typically going to bonk faster than an aerobically efficient rider. That's because they're dipping into finite glycogen sooner than the other rider. However, if they're high glycolytic, they can tolerate high levels of lactate in the bloodstream, and so they're typically well suited to short, high-intensity exercise and events like criteriums or track racing. And if you're not yet metabolically efficient, which is often the case at this point in the winter, you will need to take in more carbohydrate to sustain performance. And you're likely to carry a little bit more body fat. So let's go into the Train Low nutrition protocol. So this is nutrition for metabolic efficiency and fat loss, probably why a lot of you are here today. And this is one methodology we can utilize. So Train Low, Compete High is a periodized nutrition protocol. And what that means is we're training low glycogen, but we're competing high glycogen or high carbohydrate. So Train Low Glycogen is essentially a philosophy where we are, or an approach where we're periodizing nutrition for anywhere from 4 to 8 weeks block, where the athlete trains in a low glycogen or low carb availability state to maximize fat combustion and metabolic efficiency. Now, beware, the exercise during this phase is primarily aerobic, and we avoid a lot of anaerobic bursts or high intensity. Train low and compete high. So compete high means that the athlete will use or consume quite a bit of carbohydrate to hit peak power and to optimize performance during events or leading up to events. Competing high glycogen means we're able to hit higher performance output. And now here's just an example of a train low workout. So a workout goal would be, let's say, improve aerobic endurance, burn fat efficiently, teach body to spare glycogen, and maybe even lean up. So endurance workout A is maybe 2 hours of primarily zone 2 cycling, avoiding any bursts. Endurance workout B might be doing like 10,000 steps in a day with 5 minutes of stair climbing, maybe 30 seconds up, 1 minute down, and not a ton of high intensity work, but just enough to get some stimulation. And that's going to be primarily fat burning and aerobic. And with train low nutrition, we need fewer exogenous carbs because your body, exogenous means taking in, like consuming, because your body will use the fat on your body to fuel the ride. So it's actually okay to eat more complex, low to medium glycemic carbohydrates. There's really no need for simple sugars during your endurance rides that are meant, or during your endurance phase that is really meant to improve your metabolic efficiency and fat burning. So no gels necessary. Here's an example of a cycling workout. Pretty simple, primarily zone 2, a couple of blocks of 20 minutes at a zone 3 or tempo or medio. No bursts in here. Everything is quite steady and flat. And that's something you can do on your own or build up to a bit. So examples of train low training and nutrition strategies. So there's a few ways to practice this train low strategy. So one is commencing training with low exogenous carbohydrate availability. So maybe you're fasting overnight, or you're withholding carbohydrate during a session, so you're not fully replenishing during the session itself. That's one strategy. Another strategy is deliberately commencing a selected training session or training sessions with lowered muscle glycogen stores. So you might do a 2-a-day workout where you're using a first session to deplete glycogen and then training for a second time later in the day after withholding some carbohydrate to prevent glycogen restoration. So I like to kind of liken this to heat training and heat adaptation. You're exposing yourself a little bit to some heat exposure, maybe intentionally a little bit dehydrating, but not fully letting yourself get dehydrated to allow your body to adjust to the heat. Same here. You're depleting some glycogen, you're training in the low glycogen state, but you're not completely depriving yourself or bonking. So train low benefits. What are some of the train low benefits? Improve metabolic efficiency and fat utilization. It augments adaptive processes in skeletal muscle, such as increasing mitochondrial growth. And that's more so than undertaking exercise with normal or elevated glycogen content. Train low benefits can increase VO2 max, allow for less reliance on carbs, in turn sparing glycogen, and also improving body composition. And more fat burnt means less body fat and a leaner frame, which can have a positive impact on performance for endurance athletes. More benefits include decreased exogenous carbohydrate demands, meaning GI distress. If we don't have to eat as much carbs, that's great, especially for these longer events where you need to eat quite a bit. Also, restricting some carbohydrate availability during the early 1 to 5 hours post-exercise recovery phase also acutely upregulates various markers of substrate metabolism and endurance training adaptation in skeletal muscle. So we have an increased adaptation. Remember the two types of training. This is adaptation focused, and improvement in endurance. When paired with lower intensity endurance exercise, The Train Low protocol can help you lose fat efficiently and safely without the pressure to perform or compete. So this is not something we do in June when there's a lot of events that we're supposed to show up for. This is something we do in a non-competitive time of year. So let's talk about fueling for your specific workout. So how can we fuel an endurance workout for fat loss? Men can begin the ride in a fasted state if it's done in the morning. That's a-okay. Women and menstruators, we want to begin the ride in a carb fasted state. Maybe have a little protein and fat. And you see a nice little yogurt sample here. And an important note for women and menstruators. So women and menstruating people already have a high fatty acid oxidation capacity because estrogen is carbohydrate sparing. So we're actually already very good fat burners. And while aerobic training is obviously still important for us, we do not need to undergo fasted training. And it's not necessary. It's also not recommended because it really shoots up our cortisol. There's lots of negative consequences for women with fasted training. So especially as endurance athletes where the energy demands are so high. So that's an important note for women and menstruating people. Okay, exercising with low muscle glycogen, just a little summary here, amplifies cellular signaling responses, so increased mitochondria, and training response, increased glycogen sparing. So we have the muscle here. You can see mitochondrial biogenesis. We're creating more mitochondria, which then means higher oxidative capacity, greater fatigue resistance, and greater metabolic flexibility. So let's talk about train low daily nutrition. What does that look like? Okay, so what might a train low day look like? You might want to write this one down. So for carbohydrate daily total, if you use a tracker occasionally, like something like MyFitnessPal, you can track how many grams of carbohydrate you're eating in a day. And the recommendation is equal to or less than about 2.6 grams of carb per kilogram of body mass. That will typically be anywhere from 15 to 20% of your total daily intake. Now, this is not exact, but it gives you a bit of a ballpark range. Whereas maybe in season, you might be at 50% or 40% carbohydrate is your daily intake. During a train low phase, we're down to 15 to 20%. Pre-exercise fueling, we're going to have water. Maybe we'll do it fasted or carb fasted for the women. And during your workout, the first hour, this is for cyclists. Running is going to be naturally, running is not economical. It's not efficient, right? So it's a lot harder on the body. And so running, you might need to take on a little bit more, a little bit sooner. However, for the first 60 minutes of a ride, for example, water with maybe some salt and electrolytes for the first hour. You're essentially fasted for the first hour, or low glycogen, or low carbohydrate, I should say. Hours 1 to 2, we could do either fasted or drink. Maybe you could even do a carb drink mouth rinse and spit, which triggers our brain and gives us a little bit of energy, which has very cool studies done on that. And then after hour 2, please don't keep fasting. That's not necessary. And now you're digging too deep of a hole. And the recommendation would be about, I would say about 20 grams of carbohydrate every hour after hour 2. And this is intentionally under fueling ourselves. And again, we are not doing high intensity while doing this. And then post-exercise, make sure you hydrate, especially in the early stages of going into this train low protocol. And you hydrate with electrolytes and salt, not just plain water. Those are some examples: sweet potato, PBJ, some whole foods that you can take on your workout. Now, the pre-workout meal does matter. So, pre-workout meal will prompt the body to prioritize burning certain substrates over others. So, for example, consuming a high carb meal before an aerobic endurance workout will prompt carb burning and actually down regulate burning fat. And so this decreases potential endurance gains and metabolic efficiency adaptations. So one good way to do it is maybe either fasted or carb fasted. And then after the workout, you can consume your carbohydrate meal or breakfast that you might normally consume. So during your workout, again, 15 to 20 grams of carb per hour of exercise, intentionally going low carb here. Focus on whole foods in general, just because I want to support your gut health, and we don't need to do processed foods all the time. You can absolutely go the whole food route and just train the gut to start tolerating this. Rice cakes, PBJ, salted potatoes, maybe a tortilla roll. Great. So again, caveat. If you go harder than endurance pace or you go over threshold intensity, threshold power, you will be burning through your glycogen reserves and need to consume more hourly carbohydrate. Please try to never let yourself get to the point of bonking, as this can actually take several days to recover from, which means you're now compromising maybe half a week of training because you let yourself get too far gone. In terms of daily nutrition, here's an example during a train low protocol. This is what your plate might look like. 50% of the plate is going to be vegetables, maybe some fruit, but a very high fiber, nutrient dense meal. A third of your plate approximately is going to be whole grains, and then the other third is going to be lean protein. And then you have a little bit of fat as well, healthy fat mix in there. So that is going to look quite different than, let's say, a performance phase where 50% of the plate might actually be carbohydrates like whole grains, more starchy carbs. Okay, train low reminders. So train low glycogen nutrition protocol is a periodized approach, meaning it is not meant to be practiced year round. Long term, train low will actually decrease your metabolic flexibility and impair carbohydrate oxidation. That's why we don't do it forever, because we would lose our top end significantly. But we can do it with intention and purpose during a 4 to 8 week phase or mesocycle. During train low nutrition protocol, the majority of training should be aerobic and relatively low intensity. And remember, low carb does not mean ketogenic. You're still getting 15 to 20% of calories coming from carb. And again, women and menstruators should not do overnight fasted workouts. It's simply not necessary. And I'll put a note in here as well. For anyone who happens to have the time to be doing, let's say, 20-hour training weeks, you are already in a pretty continuous glycogen depleted state. So doing a train low protocol is less important for someone who is doing that amount of training, because they're essentially always in a low glycogen state. So if you're someone who's doing a very high volume of training every week, you may not need to go this route of, let's say, a fasted ride, or a fasted run. However, you might do a lower carb approach throughout the day. And periodized nutrition summary here. With periodization of nutrition, the overall aim is to obtain adaptations that support exercise performance. So remember that different times of year require different nutritional requirements. So if your goal is to improve body composition via leaning up and reducing excess fat, off-season or non-competitive part of the year, aerobic training is the ideal time to do so. Okay, so conclusion, what you now know. What you now know. You now know how the body's primary energy systems work, the aerobic and anaerobic, and how workout intensity and duration can impact fueling demands. You also know about periodized nutrition and why this is a modern, evidence-based approach to optimize training adaptations and long-term performance. You also know how you can adjust your nutrition to optimize training and performance via the Train Low Nutrition Protocol. And you know that the Train Low Glycogen Nutrition Protocol can actually improve metabolic efficiency and increase fat burning. So before I open it up to questions, I now want to introduce you to Lean Up, which is a periodized nutrition and training program that I have created. So Lean Up is a periodized training and nutrition program to help you apply everything that you've learned here today. This is my signature program created by me, yours truly, sports nutritionist, UCI cycling coach, Cat 1 cyclist, and former UCI World Tour Team staff member. Old race photo of me here, posting up. Here's a little sneak peek. Maybe you can't see much, but you do get quite a bit here in the program. So why join Lean Up? You can learn how to shed fat in a healthy and sustainable way with an expert coach. You will pair nutrition with a training plan, and doing so is the most effective approach to improve body composition. However, the type of exercise you do can either hinder or help your fat loss goals. Optimize your aerobic endurance and ability to burn fat for fuel by pairing specific training with a tailored nutrition plan that maximizes your aerobic adaptations, drops fat, and spares glycogen. So what's included in my Lean Up program? You have a 4-week cycling training plan or a walking/running and strength plan to maximize fat loss. All levels are welcome. You get a Training Peaks account with workouts emailed daily. You get a 7-day custom meal plan with vegan and omnivore options. You will receive workout fueling guidelines, delicious, easy recipes created by myself, a shopping list, nutrition tips to maximize success, and weekly nutrition and training tips. And I encourage you all to start dropping questions in the chat, since questions will be coming up soon. Okay, who is Lean Up for? All are welcome, beginner to advanced. If you're not a cyclist, like I said, I have a walking/run and strength program to help promote fat loss. How does it work? You basically go to coachsofi.com/shop. And once you purchase from my online shop, you'll be onboarded and I will customize the nutrition and training program for you. You will get daily workouts emailed direct to you with instructions using our online platform, Training Peaks. And you will be emailed a meal plan, shopping list, recipes, and nutrition tips. A bit of bonus content. Anyone who's joined here today will get access to live Zoom sessions if you sign up by next Wednesday, January 3rd, to join the January 5th cohort. You'll get access to those live Zoom Q&A sessions over the 4-week program. Here's some testimonials of people who have joined the plan in the past. Most people feel like they learn quite a bit. I've been super impressed by the organization, the content, and the workout plan. Someone else, Michael R., said, amazing learning experience. I'm never hungry. Always feeling very full after each meal, but not heavy or sleepy. I feel alert, energized, and have already lost 5 pounds. So there's just a couple of reviews of people who have gone through the Lean Up program. And last but not least, special offer. Anyone who has joined today or is watching this as the replay, The first 3 people to sign up for Lean Up plus a 1-hour consultation will get 20% off. And you just use the coupon code I'm ready at checkout, and you'll get 20% off both the program paired with a 1-hour video consultation with me. Again, that's coachsofi.com/shop. And we want you to sign up by January 3rd. Thank you so much. I'm going to open it up to questions. Remember, there's a bit of a 10-second delay, so please type in those questions and be patient here. Feel free to follow me on Instagram at Coach Sofi.